They say that in a true blizzard, the world doesn't just get cold, it turns deaf and blind. I was 17, a cross-country runner with lungs used to burning air, but nothing prepared me for that January night. I went to a private school in the city, which meant a long train commute home. By the time my track practice ended at 5:30, the sky wasn't just dark, it was a swirling abyss. The conductors told us our train was the last one out. The tracks were freezing over, and the city was shutting down. When I stepped off at my station, I was the only soul on the platform. The train pulled away, its red tail lights swallowed by the white curtain in seconds. My station was a lonely outpost, separated from my house by a highway and a mile-long stretch of dense, old-growth timber. Usually my dad would pick me up, but the roads were gone, buried under 2 feet of unplowed powder. "Suck it up, CB," my dad had told me over the phone. "Follow the tree line, stay off the main road. The wind will pull the heat right out of you." I began to walk. The highway was a ghost road, no plows, no salt, just a flat white desert. It was beautiful in a way that felt like an omen. Then I hit the woods. I was halfway through the forest path, my breath coming in rhythmic plumes of steam, when I saw him. He was standing 30 yards ahead, perfectly still, right in the center of the narrow trail. My brain refused to accept the image. It was negative 30 degrees with the wind chill, yet this man was standing there in a faded short-sleeved t-shirt and gym shorts. No hat, no gloves, no boots, just thin sneakers sinking into the drifts. But it was his face that made my blood turn to slush. He was wearing a smile that was too wide for his jaw, a manic, jagged expression that looked like it had been carved into his face with a knife. He wasn't shivering, he wasn't moving, he was just waiting. "Hey," I called out, my voice trembling. "Do you need help? You're going to freeze." The man didn't answer. He didn't blink. Then, in one fluid, terrifying motion, the smile vanished, and his mouth opened into a black void. He let out a sound that wasn't a scream. It was a high-pitched, guttural shriek that sounded like metal grinding on metal. And then he charged. He ran with a terrifying, jerky gait, his bare arms pumping through the freezing air. I turned and bolted. I was a varsity runner, but running in knee-deep snow is like trying to sprint through wet concrete. Every time I looked back, he was there, limbs flailing, that short-sleeved shirt, a terrifying splash of dark color against the blinding white. He was gaining. He didn't seem to feel the cold. He seemed fueled by it. I burst out of the woods and onto my street, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't look back until I reached my front porch and threw myself inside, locking the deadbolt with frozen fingers. My parents were in the kitchen. I told them everything. The clothes, the scream, the chase. My dad grabbed a flashlight, his face a mask of skepticism and concern. He looked out the front windows, but the blizzard had already filled in my tracks. "There's no one out there, CB," he said. "In this weather, a man in a t-shirt would be dead in 10 minutes. I wanted to believe him. I forced myself to go upstairs, to shower the ice off my skin, and to crawl into bed. But I couldn't sleep. The silence of the house felt heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic thump of snow-laden branches hitting the siding. Scratch, scratch, scratch. A sound came from my bedroom window. It wasn't the wind. It was rhythmic, deliberate. I crept to the window and pulled back the curtain. I didn't just scream. I fell backward, hitting the floor so hard the air left my lungs. He was right there. He was standing on the narrow ledge of the first-floor roof, his face pressed directly against the glass. Up close, he was a nightmare of biology. His skin wasn't white, it was a deep, mottled purple, the color of dead meat. His ears were black with frostbite, and his eyes were wide, bloodshot, and fixed entirely on me. He wasn't trying to break in. He was just watching. He raised a frozen, blackened hand and tapped the glass with a fingernail that snapped off like a piece of plastic. He didn't care. He just kept smiling that hideous, frozen grin. My dad burst into the room at my scream. He saw the figure, just a glimpse of a purple hand and a bald, scarred head, before the man simply stepped off the roof and vanished into the whiteout. The police didn't arrive for 2 hours. The drifts were too high. When they finally got there, they checked the perimeter. My dad was screaming at them to follow the tracks, to find the maniac who was dying of exposure. The lead officer came back inside, wiping snow from his brow. He looked at my father with a mix of pity and annoyance. "Sir," the officer said quietly, "we checked the roof. We checked the yard under the window. We checked the tree line." "And?" my dad snapped. "There aren't any tracks," the officer replied. "Not a single one. No footprints, no slide marks where he jumped. Just smooth, undisturbed snow. It's like no one was ever there. I never saw the summer man again. But every time it snows, every time the wind howls and the visibility drops to zero, I check the locks on my windows. Because I know that somewhere out there, in the cold that kills, there is a man who doesn't feel the frost, and he's still looking for a window to watch through." I've always had an addiction to falling snow. It's a rare, fleeting magic, something you can't control or predict, much like a shooting star. I'm not a hiker by nature, but when the world turns white, I lose my inhibitions. It was a Saturday night, and I was nursing a slight hangover when the sky just broke. One moment I was reading, and the next, it was as if someone had flipped a switch. The snow wasn't falling. It was claiming the earth. I drove to a secluded trail, a place that usually feels lonely, but tonight felt entirely vacant. My goal was simple: get deep enough into the woods to let the silence swallow me. After 20 minutes of trudging through the fresh powder, I stopped to breathe it in. That's when the silence died. "Hi." It was a child's voice, high, clear, and utterly impossible. My brain stalled. I spun around, scanning the dark trunks and the swirling white, but there was nothing. Just as I convinced myself it was the wind, it came again. Closer this time. "Up here, silly." I looked up. My heart didn't just skip, it stopped. Sitting on a branch nearly 30 feet above me was a boy, maybe 9 years old. He was bundled up for the cold, but he was wearing a grin that didn't belong on a human face. A wide, fixed, ear-to-ear expression, like someone who had studied how to smile but didn't understand the emotion behind it. Then, the logic hit me like a physical blow. The lowest branch was 20 feet off the ground. The trunk was a straight, icy pillar. There were no ladders, no gear, and most terrifyingly, there were no footprints around the base of the tree. If he had climbed up there, he had done it before the snow started an hour ago. He had been sitting in that freezing darkness, waiting. "How did you get up there?" I managed to croak. "It's a secret," he whispered, that awful grin never wavering. Then, without a hint of hesitation, he stood up on the branch. "Watch this." He leaned back and let gravity take him. He fell 30 feet. I screamed as I watched him hit the ground with a sickening wet thud that no amount of snow could cushion. I ran toward what I assumed was a corpse, but before I could reach him, he snapped upright. He didn't just stand. He sprung up as if his bones were made of rubber and bolted deeper into the woods, cackling. Panic took over. I should have run to my car, but I followed his tracks. I was possessed by a need to understand what I was seeing. The woods grew denser. The cackling echoed from everywhere and nowhere. Then, as I passed a thick oak, something heavy and violent latched onto my back. I went down hard. Fingers, long, sharp, and unnaturally strong, dug into my neck and shoulders. He wasn't just hitting me, he was tearing. I felt the hot slide of blood down my back. I screamed, flailing blindly, until I managed to heave him off. He hit the snow, rolled, and disappeared into the darkness, his laughter fading into the wind. I stumbled back to my car, my hat wrapped around my throat to staunch the bleeding. The rest is a blur of sirens and white hospital walls. But the real horror came 2 days later. The police had searched the area. They found my car. They found my blood in the snow. But they told me something that still keeps me awake at night. They followed the trail of footprints from the road to the tree, and from the tree to the struggle. There was only one set of tracks. Mine. According to the snow, I had walked into those woods alone, stood under a tree alone, and bled into the earth. Entirely alone. The storm didn't just fall, it buried the world. I was 19, home alone for winter break, and the isolation was starting to feel like a weight. By 6 p.m., the Wi-Fi had cut out, the power was flickering, and the roads were impassable. My neighborhood was a collection of spread-out houses, separated by dense, skeletal woods. A beautiful view in July, but a desolate wasteland in a blizzard. Driven by a mix of cabin fever and teenage stupidity, I decided to walk to my friend Ryan's house. It was only 1.5 miles away. I figured the silence would be peaceful. I was wrong. The silence was suffocating. Halfway there, the road stretches through a dead zone. No houses, no lights, just walls of pines leaning heavy with snow. I was trudging through the powder when 2 beams of light cut through the white haze ahead. A snowplow. It was moving with a slow, mechanical growl, its yellow strobe light pulsing like a dying heartbeat. Then, the impossible happened. Without warning, the plow veered violently. It didn't slide, it swerved as if the driver had seen a ghost or suffered a sudden frantic seizure. It plowed through the tree line with a sickening, muffled crunch of metal against ancient wood. Then silence returned, sharper than before. I ran toward the wreck, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "Hey, are you okay?" I shouted, my voice swallowed by the wind. I found the truck crumpled against a massive oak. The engine was still idling, a low, rhythmic throb that vibrated in my chest. The headlights were blazing, illuminating the swirling snow like a stage play. I reached the driver's side door, my hands shaking, ready to pull a bleeding body from the wreckage. I yanked the door open. The cab was empty. The seat was upright, the heater was blasting, and the radio was emitting a low, static hum. But there was no driver, no slumped body, no blood. I checked the passenger side. Nothing. Then I looked at the ground. My heart turned to ice. The snow around the truck was pristine. Aside from the deep gouges left by the tires as the truck left the road, there wasn't a single footprint. No one had stepped out of that cab. No one had crawled away. The driver hadn't just left. They had ceased to exist the moment the truck hit the tree. A coldness that had nothing to do with the weather washed over me. I backed away, my eyes locked on the empty, idling machine. "Help me." A man's voice tore through the wind. It came from the darkness behind the truck. I froze. I wanted to help, I truly did, but every primal instinct in my DNA was screaming at me to run. "Help me!" The second shout was different. It didn't come from the woods. It sounded like it was whispered directly into my ear, yet projected from a distance at the same time. It was impossibly close. No human could have moved through 5 feet of snow that fast. I didn't look back. I bolted. I ran until my lungs burned like they were filled with acid, not stopping until I reached Ryan's front porch and pounded on the door like a madman. When the police finally arrived an hour later, they didn't find a wreck. They didn't find a crumpled plow or a damaged tree. They told me they drove the entire stretch of road and found nothing. No tire tracks, no broken branches, no evidence that a 10-ton piece of machinery had ever left the pavement. They looked at me like I was high or losing my mind. But I know what I saw. I saw a machine alive with no soul inside it, and I heard a voice that wasn't looking for help. It was looking for company.